This is David Spence from the University of Texas School of Law, and this is part 2 of our 3-part video series on complexity and the energy transition. And in part 1, we talked about why trade-offs between energy reliability, energy affordability, and environmental performance in the energy system remain central to those systems and are a crucial part of transitioning to a much lower carbon energy system. In this part of the series, we're going to talk about some of the centrifugal forces that try to steer our attention away from grappling with those essential questions. I want to start by picking up with an analogy we used at the end of part 1 to say that this situation, that is talking about trade-offs and thinking hard about the difficulties associated with this transition, is not analogous to a soldier charging up Omaha Beach questioning the orders of his superior. To the contrary, this is a situation in which we're still planning. We're discussing what climate policy ought to look like at the same time that we're trying to rally support for it. And we can do both, even if those things are in tension with one another. Former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, father of the current governor, said this in a memorable way when he said that we campaign in poetry and govern in prose. He said this as a lament. He was not urging that we avoid the difficult questions early on. To the contrary, he was saying that we have to do both. We have to tell people the truth at the same time that we inspire them. So we can do that. If I inspire you by misleading you, I earn only a temporary victory at the cost of your trust. And right now, climate progress requires building bridges to broaden support for climate legislation. The problem is that political conditions today make doing that difficult, and that's what this part of the talk is about. The equation you see here in symbols and pictures at the bottom of this slide is distorting our perception of the issues and of each other and making it harder and harder to engage different points of view, and most importantly, harder to think critically about the things that we want, and therefore to find policy agreement. This is the post-truth world that we've been hearing so much about. And again, no doubt you have no difficulty seeing this dynamic at work in others with whom you disagree, but it's really hard to detect it in ourselves, and we need to be able to do that if we're going to make climate progress. Which is not to suggest that this phenomenon is symmetrical across partisan or ideological lines. It's not. But nor is it absent from any part of our political spectrum. It's everywhere. We need to fight to keep it out of the process of building a climate majority. The quotation in the box you see here is from Federalist number 10, and it illustrates part of the equation that was on the previous slide and how that idea is not new. Political philosophers have always understood that what we want influences what we believe. It's how humans are wired. And so politicians and lobbyists have always tried to capitalize on that wiring to shape what we see in our mind's eye when we think about political issues or actors, and to induce positive feelings about some of them and negative feelings about others. If they can do that, then they can trigger a fascinating suite of cognitive biases that make their jobs easier. They won't have to work as hard to get us to focus on the facts that help their cause and to avoid those that hurt their cause. In the last half century, behavioral psychology, cultural anthropology, and other social sciences have fleshed out all of these various biases. Many people viewing this video, I'm sure, are familiar with them, and I'm not going to elaborate on the few listed here, except to say that they're worth understanding, because these are the forces that are playing a large role in how our democracy is fracturing right now, how we sometimes unconsciously accelerate that process, and they are important to avoiding some of the distortions that get in the way of formulating a climate majority. What is new is, at least in my lifetime, is how political polarization is supercharging these biasing effects. This figure uses data that places members of Congress on an ideological dimension from left to right. But this particular figure is showing the ideological distance between the parties in Congress, so that as the figure gets higher on the y-axis, the distance between the parties is greater. As you can see, the parties are bitterly divided now. And when that happens, each party comes to regard the other's agenda as alarming, even disastrous, which injects much more emotion into political debate. We want what we want more intensely, which influences the way we reason through political challenges like forming a climate policy. We see this sense of extreme urgency contributing to the ongoing breakdown of fairness norms in Congress, including associated with the filling of Supreme Court vacancies, for example. The thing is, emotion amplifies all of these biases that have always been a part of us. Polarization amplifies emotion, and modern media tends to amplify both. Let me explain what I mean by that. For most of the 20th century, modern mass media was, by today's standards, pretty bland and slow and corporate and white and male, but it also exhibited other characteristics that served as centralizing forces in our politics. Because there were only a few national news outlets, they were populated by journalists mostly trained to at least aspire to objectivity and to double check and triple check sources before publishing stories. News was heavily curated and parsed out to us daily or weekly like carefully brewed tea. We had time to savor the tea, to read or listen to each story in full. Now we get our information online, and it comes at us much faster and in much higher volumes. That's true whether we seek it out or even when we don't seek it out. A lot of that information is uncurated, designed to persuade us rather than to inform, coming from advocates who may not be interested in giving us a complete warts and all picture of an issue or a policy or a problem, because persuasion is what they're after. So separating the good information from the propaganda is more difficult and time-consuming than it's ever been. There's so much of it that we don't feel like we have the time to digest it fully and slowly, to read to the 20th paragraph or even to the second paragraph. And that's the big problem. Deep understanding of policy issues, particularly complicated policy issues like climate policy, requires grappling with the complexities and the qualifications and the caveats, all the context that you find by reading to the 20th paragraph. So even if you go searching for reputable sources online and you read to the 20th paragraph, there's an additional problem. And this is one most people are familiar with by now, but the information you see online is still likely to be censored because we tend to click on the stories that support our beliefs, make us feel good. Social media algorithms learn what we like and give us more of it, and they learn what we don't like and they give us less of it. So all of these forces, cognitive biases, ramped up emotion associated with polarization, and the fragmented media landscape, they all conspire to hide from us the messy downsides and complexities of the things we want. And we lose the habit of looking for that complexity over time. In a way, our critical thinking muscles begin to atrophy, particularly with respect to the things that we want to be true. And let us not overlook the fact that the social process of digesting information and forming beliefs now happens online as well. For the most part, that process was once almost exclusively about talking to people, talking to your neighbors, family, coworkers, friends about the news, with all the context and the nuance that face-to-face communication gives us. We do that now in online communities in large part, and I want to make 3 quick points about that process. First of all, online communities tend to be more ideologically homogeneous. This is what the book, The Filter Bubble, is all about. This triggers more rapid belief formation because everybody we're talking to has the same information and tends to be inclined to believe the same things. So inside these filter bubbles, a kind of orthodoxy of belief arises, and we tend to chase away the dissenters, or maybe you've exited groups online in which you don't feel you fit. And anonymity in communication online makes all of this a lot easier and faster. Second point, a growing body of literature supports the notion that falsehoods travel farther and faster than truths do online, and that emotional content travels farther and faster as well. So to put it bluntly, we see a lot of falsehoods and half-truths that are encouraging us to hate something or someone. That's a problem. That can distort our thinking. Third point, and this is perhaps the one that's most bothersome, at least to me. Online conversations are less honest than real-life conversations for the same reason that reality TV is less honest than real life. The presence of a potential audience online makes us conscious of the fact that what we say is being evaluated by people we don't know. And so the conversation becomes no longer just about exchanging views and trying to learn from one another, and now becomes partly, at least, about persuasion. So we all become lobbyists in a way, emphasizing the dimensions of a problem or issue that we think will persuade others, and de-emphasizing the elements of the issue that we think hurt our cause. And when that happens, we stop learning from one another. We can be educators and advocates, but not at the same time. And this is perhaps the most tragic element of all this, because we stop talking about certain issues. We stop acknowledging certain truths, and that's a problem. If you've seen the new Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, you know how powerful and insidious this dynamic can sometimes be. So if your response to all of this is to say, yeah, so this is a fight, I'm ready to fight, then I would suggest that you think about what your objective is. Building a national majority in favor of bold climate legislation is no small feat. And if we are demonizing people who are on our own side, or at least who could be, or if we're engaging in dialogue that is designed to provoke rather than to build coalitions, build support, that's counterproductive, especially when you're making unnecessary enemies along the way. So how do we guard against this phenomenon? We audit the pictures in our own mind's eye. We ask ourselves, am I so emotionally attached to my beliefs that it's stopping me from engaging in debates on the merits of my point of view or somebody else's point of view? Am I trying to win conversations rather than learn from them? There are plenty of these contempt narratives floating around in the ether in the energy and climate debate. There are lots of good reasons to be angry about the current state of affairs and to be angry at particular actors for their past behaviors. That doesn't mean necessarily that we ought to exclude those actors from participating in the provision of energy services in the future that are zero carbon emission energy services. If we focus on emissions and we are bold along that metric, then we can wait and see who can survive in that world and who cannot. But being broadly dismissive of classes of people who challenge our beliefs or who we consider unworthy of participating in the future, the net zero future, is a mistake. It's counterproductive, at least in my view. That's the end of video number 2. In video number 3, we will zero in on the particulars of the legislative majority building task that's ahead of us if we're going to pass national climate legislation. See you in part 3.